Before we get stuck in, I just want to make a couple things clear. You all know who I am, and if you don't, hi, I'm RemyRaccoon, and you're right, I do sound kind of familiar. That's because you might recognize my voice from these heinous, mean-spirited, and utterly awful videos. Once upon a time when I went by the name Valor4XD, I took the CinemaSins format and appropriated it for the purpose of going through every single Ratchet & Clank game and nitpicking the ever-loving blarg out of it. People love these videos, and I imagine these same people probably enjoy watching Angry Joe's 1000th unfunny skit while eating cardboard, but I want people to understand that I made those videos in the first place because of how much of a fan I am of this series. It's been in my life for almost 20 years. People have asked me for a review of Rift Apart because they believe that my opinion will be genuine and not influenced in any way, monetary or otherwise. So when I say the following, I want people to know that this is a genuine, unfiltered opinion. Not from a review site where it's hard to gauge whether they're being truthful or not. Not from someone who's experiencing the series for the first time, those people's opinions are totally valid by the way, but from a lifelong fan. Someone who was skeptical after the last few games and wasn't sure Insomniac was going to be able to pull it off after all these years. Guys, they fucking pulled it off and then some. Big disclaimer, this will be a largely spoiler-free review and will only have footage mostly from the first half of the game, with no major spoilers regarding narrative beats aside from those we already know. I won't be going super in-depth for this video, and instead I'll likely be doing a full review later on down the line when people have had a chance to play it and let it sink in, provided they haven't already sacrificed something of great value to even get the PlayStation 5 in the first place. Me? Oh, I just figured my doodle was getting in the way, so yeah, if you regularly buy from the black market, enjoy. But yeah, like I said, I've been with the Ratchet & Clank series almost since the beginning, and through its most incredible highs and disheartening lows. I know the original quadrilogy like the back of my hand, and I've been playing these games since around, 2003? So that should at least count for something when I proclaim that Rift Apart is the long-awaited return to form this series has been begging for since, for me at least, 2013. And for most people, 2009. 12 years, man. It's been 12 years since we last got a full-fledged Ratchet & Clank game, and not one that was a discount LEGO Star Wars knockoff. The hype for this is so huge, it's palpable. I could pick up the hype and throw it at Nefarious and knock a fifth off of his life bar. Speaking of which, most of us are aware of the premise by now, but here's a refresher. During a parade dedicated to the heroic endeavors of the titular duo, Clank announces he has a gift for Ratchet. After the Dimensionator broke fighting Mr. I and Into the Nexus, Clank repairs it in his spare time, presenting to Ratchet a fixed and fully functional Dimensionator so that he may find the rest of the Lombaxes. Before Ratchet can even react, Dr. Nefarious crashes the party and makes off with the Dimensionator, claiming he'll take everyone to a dimension where he always wins, and Ratchet decides, oh, I'll just shoot it before he can use it, I'm so smart. This causes reality to start breaking apart, as rifts to planets in other dimensions start opening up, and after a brief jaunt through different dimensions, the Dimensionator explodes, separating Ratchet & Clank for what, the fucking fifth time at this point? If I hadn't used the more like Ratchet or Clank joke in Everything Wrong with a Crack in Time, this would have been the perfect time to use it. Clank, now missing an arm and with his little leggies not working, is found by a female Lombax named Rivet, who's a member of the resistance effort against the totalitarian iron-fisted rule of Emperor Nefarious, a role Dr. Nefarious stumbles into and uses in his pursuit to defeat Ratchet and now Rivet once and for all. Rivet, wanting answers, snatches Clank up and they set off for adventure, while Ratchet tries to get Clank back, all while trying to fix the mess he and Clank have inadvertently caused. To get it out of the way, Rivet is a lovely character. She's charismatic, she's adorable, she's got a tough exterior but is willing to lend a hand where need be, and she could probably break my fucking spine. But she, thankfully, doesn't feel like a Mary Sue like some people were expecting just because she's a female character. Nor does she feel like a one-note antithesis to her counterpart Ratchet. In the final third of the game in particular, she goes through a small character arc that may feel familiar to people who played the original games in the series. But I can't go into any further detail without spoiling something pretty major, so you'll just have to trust me when I say I really like her and I'd honestly like to see her helm her own game someday. And despite the titular duo spending the majority of the game ripped apart, I think that in the rare instance that they do get to communicate, they show some of the strongest writing the two have had in some time. The dynamic between the duo in 2016 was pretty weak, and there really wasn't much character interaction to write home about in Into the Nexus. Plus, they spent most of their time separated in A Crack in Time, so even though it's brief, it feels good to have what feels like an older version of Ratchet and Clank back together again. There's some genuinely funny banter from them. Ratchet 2016's writing is aged like fine yogurt in comparison, and the voice acting is top-notch. Ratchet in particular sounds like he's full of so much life compared to the last few games. Partially because of what I assume to be better voice direction, and partially because I'm fairly sure they did the Spider-Man thing where most dialogue for both playable characters has 2 lines recorded. One for standing still or running around, and the other for combat or platforming scenarios, which is a really nice touch.
Pleasure to meet you, Junkbot! Pleasure to meet you, Junkbot. We're, trying to get into another dimension to use their Rubion Forge.
Jennifer Hale of FemShep fame fits Rivet alarmingly well with some simultaneously badass and adorable delivery.
Rabbit pup points are kinda cute when they're not trying to gnaw your ankles!
And Armin Shimmerman and Robin Atkin Downs as Doctor and Emperor Nefarious do bang-up jobs as expected, with one of my favourite moments for some reason being the one where the Doctor straight up throws a temper tantrum.
What? Get that Lombax! Get that Lombax! Get that Lombax!
It's worth mentioning that Captain Quark does appear in the game, despite his voice actor Jim Ward being unable to reprise his role due to very severe medical complications. Respectfully, Quark only makes a minor appearance at the start and the end of the game, and plays no role in the story itself, which on one hand could be seen as being respectful of Jim Ward's role in the series, but on the other hand is great because his replacement is... anyone ever watched the Salty DK Dan Pokemon Emerald Friendlock? You know how Monsters puts on that funny Borat impression for the entire playthrough where you can just barely tell it's Borat despite how utterly average it is?
First thing to say, I am sorry about pastis.
God damn it, do we really need
Wow,
Borat Spoink? Oh my fucking god!
Honestly, it's the same deal here, but without the Wow We Was and the subsequent Passat beams.
Yes! Folks, we have a momentous day in store for you. Starting with me. And ending with a surprise gift from Clank to Ratchet.
It's not a great imitation, but you won't hear it for long, and I think that's for the best because as much as I miss having Quark pop up throughout the series, his character arc started and ended a long time ago, so if this is where Quark is retired from the series, at least as a prominent mainstay, then I think I'm fine with that. But despite the possibility of an incredibly convoluted narrative carried across different dimensions, the story itself remains pretty simple for most of its runtime. So there are 1 or 2 points where you can tell they threw in a last-minute complication at the end of a level as an excuse to travel to a new planet, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Nowhere near as egregious as Ratchet & Clank 2 being all like, go through this level until you find a screen where a character calls you and tells you to go to a different planet.
If you have any intention of fixing the mess you've made, watch this.
Wow, she's got a few bolts loose.
And even though it seems like padding at that moment, actually finishing the level leaves the total opposite impression. Not only for story reasons, but because it was a joy getting to visit that planet because of how absolutely gorgeous and rich with detail it was. I'm not sure if this is a bold statement, but I think Rift Apart is the best looking game of all time. Some chuds on Twitter will try to convince you otherwise. No, I'm anal retentive and this bush not moving when you brush against it is making me piss my sweatpants that I haven't changed in 43 days. But every single inch of this game is riddled with excessive detail. Every animation is exuberant and immaculate. It's beautiful. I'm not sure there's any other word for it. People will say this is the closest any developer has come to making a playable Pixar movie, and while that analogy is old and if you use it I'll crush your tiny brain with my bare paws, it's incredibly apt. Show me footage of this game without the context of it being a game and I would believe you if you said it was an upcoming movie. This was the first game I played entirely all the way through in 4K to finally get some use out of that 4K TV I got for Christmas, and while this fidelity mode limits it to a still very playable 30 FPS, it looks stunning. Ray tracing is working at full force in this mode, from photorealistic reflections in the ground to turning Clank into a full-blown chrome dome, and my eyes felt like they were being gently massaged the entire time. And yet, in comparison, the game's performance plus ray tracing mode made my eyes cum. 4K was impressive, don't get me wrong, but seeing this game at 1440p at 60 FPS with ray tracing still enabled, it's fucking wizardry. Despite the lower resolution, it basically looked the same. It's a little hard to convey here due to YouTube's awful compression algorithm, but honestly you can still see how utterly stunning this game looks for yourself. We're this early on into the PS5's life cycle and we're already seeing something that looks this good, and I simply cannot fathom how they did it, nor how much further graphics, at least in a more stylized depiction like this, can truly advance. But I said that about Rise: Son of Rome back in 2013, and that game looks like a bowl of Weet-Bix in comparison.
How do y'all eat this?
Regardless, this game is legitimately one of the best things my poor, tired eyes have laid their sights on. And these visuals have a surprisingly good soundtrack to back it up too. You're not going to be clicking your fingers along to this OST like you would with Iridia or Novalis from the first game. I say this after having the battle music from the climax on Blizzard Prime stuck in my head for 2 days straight, but they made the smart decision to bring on Mark Mothersbaugh of Devo fame, and Wataru Hokoyama, one of the composers behind Halo 2 Anniversary, Vita's sleeper hit Soul Sacrifice, and the greatest game of all time, to compose the soundtrack, and it's so much better compared to 2016's offering. Gentle, atmospheric pieces will accompany you while you're exploring, while a much more tense score with a subtly grandiose scale will be your symphony of destruction, with a mix of sharp synths and a pounding orchestra to back them up. But whatever, that's all for naught if the gameplay isn't up to scratch, and it brings me so much pleasure to say that this is the most fun I've had with a Ratchet & Clank game since I first played Up Your Arsenal. If you played 2016, you'll be right at home. It controls a little bit more like a shooter than a platformer these days, with R2 firing, L2 zooming in for more accurate shots, and being locked into strafing during combat by default. Compared to 2016 though, there's been a few noticeable changes which do nothing but improve gameplay. I was initially skeptical about the idea of the Phantom Dash, a mechanic that's basically a dodge with iframes, because Ratchet's strafing was more than enough to get by. But for such a simple inclusion, it makes combat feel so fresh and refined. It goes hand in hand with the game's attempt at more interactive combat arenas, with the inclusion of things like swingshot targets, rifts, and walls to run across Prince of Persia style, which makes combat arenas feel like the ones you'd see in, of all games, Uncharted 4, adding options for mobility and verticality to blindside your enemies. Enemy encounters can often be pretty chaotic, so not only will you end up relying on the dash a fair bit, but once you master it and learn to make use of the environment, you end up feeling like a total badass as you zip about the place and catch goons off guard. I haven't played on a higher difficulty aside from the default one yet, but I've heard that enemies move a little faster and require you to always be on the move and constantly repositioning yourself, and I personally can't wait to sink my teeth into the highest difficulty and have my ass beaten to a bloody pulp. But that's just a regular Friday night, eh boys? Oh, of course, and the weapon selection. One of the most important parts of any Ratchet game. Gosh, I think it might be my favorite. I need more time to think about it, but the game starts incredibly strong, throwing some of its most interesting weapons at you right off the bat and almost never lets up. Out of the 20 weapons, only 5 of them are repeats from previous games, 2 of which aren't even available until challenge mode. And I think that's half the reason why I love Rift Apart so much. The reimagining only had 2 new weapons, the Pixelizer and the Proton Drum, which I really liked both of them, but visual spectacle aside, they weren't the most exciting. And the abundance of old weapons made the game feel like a geriatric old fart who tells you the same stories about how they made it through the war by the skin of their turkey neck with only a level 4 combustor and an empty warmonger they bludgeoned their enemies to death with. Here it feels like Up Your Arsenal, with a greater focus on new weapons while bringing back some of the older weapons that fit into your arsenal snug as a Speedle. Rift Apart is the first game to feel like it has a truly fresh new set of weapons since A Crack in Time at least. And that's what makes it so gosh darn enjoyable. Rift Apart covers several weapon archetypes as it's expected to do, but there are also some really fun weapons that buck these trends and are so much fun to use. The Enforcer is an insanely cool shotgun that fires one barrel if you pull the trigger halfway down, and both if pressed all the way, while the Ricochet fires a round that asks you to time your presses of the fire button to repeatedly smack enemies around like it's an episode of The Three Stooges, and it's easily one of my favourite weapons in the franchise. There's also the Negatron Collider, basically the Alpha Disruptor, but instead of one blast, you charge it up to fire a continuous stream that you can focus on one enemy or sweep across a group. The game's replacement for Mr. Zircon, despite functioning more like a stationary turret, is Mr. Fun Guy, a depressed little dude who's forced to party and has been worked to death and really does not want to be there. Basically Slurm's Mackenzie in weapon form. Heck man, even the starter pistol weapon feels decent. The gimmick of holding it down halfway to fire slower, more accurate shots feels a little redundant though, but it still feels fun to use and retains its use throughout a good chunk of the game, which is a very welcome change compared to older games in the series where the Combustor was outclassed half an hour later. Some weapons, like the Shatter Bomb, feel a little too iterative of previous weapons despite how good it feels to use, and there's a late game weapon that, I'll be honest, I just don't see myself using often except to max out its level, but I am extremely impressed with the variety on offer. And the fact that every time I said, oh, that's probably the last weapon I'll get before I finish the game, Mrs. Zircon responded by saying, "Sweetie, have I got the surprise for you?" When you're not pouring shotgun blasts into nefarious troopers' heads, you'll be out exploring, collecting gold bolts to unlock fun game modifiers and sticker packs for the game's utterly insane photo mode, armor pieces which can be mixed and matched without worry of losing out on any stat bonuses, which you can also paint into kind of RemyRaccoon colors, which is pretty pog, but otherwise finally making that old size matters feature a reality in a game that's not a load of trash, and doing a little bit more platforming than I expected. The focus is still squarely on that combat, of course. I mean, if I made a combat loop that satisfying, I'd want players to be experiencing it as much as possible too. But with the addition of the Phantom Dash and running across walls, there's a bit more jumping and not falling into an endless void to be done here, even if it's never particularly challenging. The game has pocket dimensions, think those little bonus challenges from Super Mario Sunshine, which you'll venture into to find collectibles, and these areas could have rectified this issue, but the platforming always remains rather simple, which is a little disappointing. The same can also be said about the two open areas you get to explore, which, instead of letting you explore them and find whatever collectibles you need naturally, the collectibles will be marked on the map after a short time, so it's less where are they and more how do I get them, which doesn't really encourage much exploration. And even then, how do I get there is a question that's often very easily solved. In the next game, I'd love to see them take it further by making optional platforming areas more challenging and opting to encourage exploration rather than holding my hand through the process. But as it is, it feels like the game is afraid of players getting stuck for too long and is unwilling to let players explore and find secrets on their own. It's still fun in its own right, but next time I want to see Insomniac take off our leash and let us run wild. That sounds kinky and that was completely unintentional. And while we're at it, I don't want to get bogged down on the negatives because like I said, I love the heck out of this game, but the dimensional rifts feel a little underutilized. From a visual standpoint, they're always present, whether they're just popping off in the background or spawning enemies and such. But from a gameplay and even a set piece standpoint, I wish it was used more. I wasn't expecting stuff like the opening level on a consistent basis, but later use of the idea feels a bit more reserved in comparison. As if it blew its load a little too early. Wow, that's the second reference to ejaculate in this review, what the fuck. From a gameplay standpoint, these rifts are used to jump about the battlefield to catch the enemy unaware and also used during some platforming segments, but only one or two areas make use of actually traveling between dimensions in uninterrupted gameplay, one of which is an extremely hard to fuck up time trial on the back of a Speedle. Like, yeah, okay, honestly, it's insanely cool that this arena challenge says, "Ayo bitch, let's just warp you to different levels for the sake of riding through them for a few seconds before we warp you back to the arena." That gimmick never gets old, sure. The spectacle of it all is still unbelievably cool, but it does feel more like an aesthetic thing rather than anything that affects the gameplay all that much. There is an exception, however. Here's some unedited footage of Blizzard Prime.
That crystal is a substance called Blizon. Try using your hammer on it. The Blizon appears to have stored energy from the dimensional rifts.
Whoa. Another dimension.
Literally how? The idea of swapping between dimensions or time periods is not a new mechanic to games. I mean, come on, we all remember Effect and Cause from Titanfall 2. At least the 10 of us who played it, but where that level was set indoors, Blizzard Prime's dimension switching mechanic changes the entire level right before your eyes, and it is legitimately jaw-dropping. It's, again, unfortunately not used to the absolute best of its ability, delegated to some very simple puzzle solving, but the sheer spectacle of this mechanic is enough to make Blizzard Prime and the later level it's used in some of the most memorable levels you'll probably ever play in the series, heck, games in general. But really, while the aforementioned issues of underutilized dimensional rifts, simple platforming, and an unwillingness to let players explore on their own can be considered detriments, and absolutely should, they also play a positive role in what I believe might be Rift Apart's greatest strength. This game never lets up. Not once in its 10 to 12 hour runtime did I feel like the game had screeched to a halt. Not during the Clank puzzles. Using spheres and their various properties to direct his countless possibilities to the exit were fun and largely unobtrusive puzzles that required thought, but that aha moment was never too far from my grasp. Not during the game's hacking minigame. Instead of some dumb new puzzle or time challenge that literally everyone hates, it's just a variant on the regular shooting and strafing gameplay that's short and sweet. There are no sections entirely devoted to the use of a gadget, like say using the refractor or gelinator in an isolated area with minimal combat. In fact, you don't really get any traditional gadgets here, just new traversal mechanics. I didn't even realize there were no traditional gadgets until I watched a review that mentioned there were none, and at first I was like, oh, that kinda sucks, I think. But after thinking about it, I was like, wait, no, the gadgets were usually the least engaging parts of the original games. Lamau, bye, mind the door on your way out. Like, no, seriously, think of how many times you've replayed Up Your Arsenal and you've been having an absolute blast until you reach Hollow-Star Studios and are met with a Clank section, followed by a giant Clank section, followed by the main part of the level where at one point you have to use the hacker, clear out a room of Tyrannoids, and then immediately use the hacker again. Some people call it a palate cleanser after so much combat, but I call it a set of masochistic kinks. Rift Apart, in comparison, is a roller coaster ride from start to finish and does its absolute best to make sure that that ride is uninterrupted. The inclusion of a sprint button and eventually the best incarnation of the hover boots yet make movement feel quick and snappy alongside just being flat out fun. The game almost never forces you to stop to listen to conversations, even if that can result in a couple instances where you accidentally interrupt important dialogue because characters are extremely chatty to a fault. But still, there's no forced walking sections, only a few elevator rides you can't speed up. That's about it. Every level comes with a cool set piece moment that either ties directly into gameplay or, again, rarely asks you to stop and engage with it for the sake of the story. There's one level later on which plays out a bit like a horror game, but you're not weak, slow, and defenseless, you're still Ratchet, and you still have your hover boots to zip around with. And heck, Clank levels and glitch hacking sections are completely skippable. Sure, you could skip the puzzles in a crack in time, but here, because Clank sections are basically uninterrupted puzzles, you can skip Clank levels in their entirety. Insomniac, I can kiss you, you beautiful bastards! Almost every decision made here has been done so in an attempt to cater for those who will be replaying the game ad nauseum, as we Ratchet and Clank fans tend to do, because haha, what are other games, am I right? But players who want to take their time are also catered for, and are rewarded with optional dialogue and just enough collectibles to warrant careful exploration, alongside what may be the series' best use of gold bolts yet. Rift Apart is not bogged down by modern sensibilities despite implementing some of them itself. Clicking R3 will show an objective marker on screen, clicking L3 makes you sprint, the map and inventory screen looks like something ripped out of an open world Ubisoft game, collectibles are marked on the map when you get close enough, etc, etc. But despite being the most modern and cinematic Ratchet & Clank to date, it doesn't actively halt gameplay to try to tell its story like many games tend to do these days, with forced walking sections and the like. Cutscenes are skippable, and you can hoverboot right through almost any section of the game you want. There's no crappy forced stealth with a different character who can't fend for herself. There's no excessive traveling between map markers. There's a bit of following characters while listening to them talk, but you can almost always safely zoom right through those. There's no crafting. Skill trees are a breeze to navigate. The game doesn't have 300 billion side quests where you fetch the king's slippers or whatever the fuck you do in Skyrim, but the side quests it does have are cheeky disguises for what are simply paths that divert from the main objective. There is no downtime. There is no opportunity for me to feel bored. There is no chance to catch my reflection in the screen and trigger me to think over what a sad, sorry mess of a person I am, because the level loads 2 seconds later and suddenly I'm a happy rack again. Rift Apart is far from perfect. Amongst a few other smaller issues which I'll be delving into further with a potential full review, its hesitancy to let go of the player's hand or to challenge the player outside of combat it's unfortunate. But the core gameplay loop of shooting goons, leaping between walls, shooting more goons, hoverbooting off ramps and shooting even more goons is just... gosh, dude, look, real talk. I know a lot of people will be looking to my review with the hopes of an unfiltered opinion from a lifelong Ratchet & Clank fan, so once again, here it is. This is my unfiltered opinion, my genuine reaction. Not only is this the most fun I've had in a Ratchet & Clank game ever, but this is the most fun I've had in a video game in some time. Is it worth $70 though? I imagine that's the question on everyone's lips, like are thongs foot harnesses, or what percentage of Mountain Dew is actually Dew and what percent of it is Mountain? And as someone who paid $140 for the deluxe edition, keep in mind that's around 100 US bones, I think I got my money's worth. Even though a single playthrough is only going to last around 12 hours with a few more on top for collectibles and the Platinum Trophy, this is a game I'll be replaying over and over again. And if you think that maybe it's a little too expensive for such a short game, I would suggest not equating length to price of entry, and instead only on level of enjoyment. And with that in mind, this was $140 dues well spent. And without spoiling anything, the ending of the game implies that we may be getting even more Ratchet in the future, and I for one am incredibly excited to see what Insomniac has in store. Will they cap this story off with a Spider-Man Miles Morales type deal? Maybe even a game that focuses entirely on Rivet. No matter what, for the first time in years I can say the future of Ratchet & Clank is bright. And while I'd hesitate to call any game worth buying an entire new console for, Rift Apart is a damn compelling argument for doing so. The Platinum Trophy is ridiculously easy and has no trophies for completing challenge mode and collecting everything though, so actually it's a train wreck. It's 2016 all over again, fellas! Hey, thank you guys for being patient. I know it's been a little bit of a wait since the last video. I didn't want it to be such a long wait, but unfortunately we did have a few complications. Our landlord accidentally severed our phone line, so we sort of haven't had proper internet for some time, and I have also had some financial trouble, so I wasn't able to afford mobile data for myself so I could upload stuff, which thankfully some very generous individuals helped me with, so thank you to those guys who did help me, those guys and gals. But thanks to them, and also thanks to the support of my patrons, I have mobile data and I'm able to upload these videos now. So yeah, again, sorry for the wait. Also, in regards to Ratchet & Clank content, I did mention in this review that there is the possibility of a longer, more in-depth review, and I'm still not 100% sure if I'm going to do that, but there is at least one more very large Ratchet & Clank video coming that tackles the entire series. It's not a bunch of reviews or anything. It's I'm not going to spoil it here. I'm going to keep it secret until the very moment it comes out here, but if you are interested, you can actually join our Discord, where I'm getting some community feedback on this particular topic that I'm talking about that I'm not going to spoil. But yeah, if you're not worried about getting spoiled, you can join our Discord. There's a link in the description. And yeah, my ass hurts, so I'm just gonna get straight to the patrons. Hey, check out these dorks. Thank you, dorks. Sofox, Parvis99, Legro457, K, Damie Maxted, Dalek Boy, Sergio Palsis, Aether Gruby, Alice Whitaker Bartlett, Heat Hoot Skyet, Jayet, Johannes Anderson, Jazzy Become Android, Karuta the Kitsune, Leo Alex50, Nathaniel Forrest, Philip Elk, Sheepy, Squid Superstar, The Dervinator, and Travis Miranda. Also Zip and Native Light. I almost forgot, sorry. Big thank you to these giant dorks and also all the other dorks who pledged to my Patreon. You guys are keeping this channel alive and I'm sincerely grateful. If you like what you see, thumbs up I guess. If you don't like what you see, fuck you, don't click that dislike button. I will fucking find you. But also, follow me on Twitter for regular updates on videos and whatever the fuck else I'm doing. Join the Discord to talk about my upcoming Ratchet & Clank video and also just to shoot the shit. You can send fan art to me through Discord or Twitter at RemyRaccoonYT or through my email at theremyraccoon@gmail.com. Pledge to my Patreon and you'll get your name in the credits, and you can do, I'll do some voting thing in the future where you can decide on what video I do, I guess. And yeah, that's it. I think my throat is dead, dude. I'm just gonna leave. No kiss from me this time. Sorry, that's not very socially distant of me.